In this section, we're going to be talking about the input functions we're going to be using on our web app. So what are input functions? Input functions allows the user to give inputs to the web app, which will now be used on the server side to perform computation. Some of these input functions take text, some of them take values, and some of them are choices which the user is going to select from. In this section, I'm going to be showing you the functions that allows your user to impute a text. So if you want your user to impute a text value, then you are going to use these three functions. First function is text input. The second function is password input for inputting passwords. And the third function is text area input. So let's first of all start with the text input. So the text input, if you have to check the documentation, you are going to see the arguments of the text input. So you can see the text input. It has 5 arguments. Input ID, which allows, this is the ID, the unique ID you are going to give to your input, which the server side is going to be referring to if the server side wants to use the input. Then you have the label, which will be visible on the user interface, and also have the default value, which is going to be in the box, and also have the width of the text. We also have placeholder. This is going to give a hint to anybody that wants to use the app that, okay, this is what you are going to put in the app. So I'm going to show you how we are going to use this argument. The input ID is the unique ID given to it. We can call this name. Then the next is going to be the label. This is what is going to be showing on the web app. Your name. So if I'm to run this, so you can see my text inputs. So this box only accepts text. So text values, I can write my name. If your name is John, your name is Jacob, so you can write your name. Now the next argument there, you can see we have value. So let's say the default value is John. So you can see the default value here is John. So that is used to give a default value. And also we have width. If you want to increase the width of your text, I want to give it a percentage, 100% or in pixels. So let's say I have to give it a width of 400 pixels. So you can see it has changed. I'm to give it a width of 100%. So you can see how the width is changing. So when you want to change the width of your text, these are the arguments that are going to be changing. Then the last argument is the placeholder. So I can say placeholder, your name. I can say please impute your name. Impute your name. So most of the time, placeholder usually is to be, they usually give the user the hint of what to put in the text. So let's remove that argument, John. So you can see our placeholder, please impute your name. So this is giving the user the hint that yes, please impute your name. The next function I'm going to be talking about is the password input. This allows your user to input a password. If you go to the password input documentation, you're also going to, it also has similar arguments as that of the text inputs, just little differences. You can see the input ID, the label, the default value, the width also. That is to increase the width of your box, and also we have the placeholder. So if I'm to give an input ID of password, this is the input. Always remember this input ID the server side always refers to this input ID, so it has to be unique. No two inputs can have the same input ID, else you are not going, your server is going to be, you are going to confuse your server. So you have to make sure that the input ID is unique. If you are giving an input ID of name, then another input ID of date, so they can't have the same input ID because you are going to be referring to those input ID at your server side. So now let me give the input ID of password, and let me call it your password, the label. So I've already explained the arguments. You can see them, you can try them. The width argument, the placeholder arguments, you can try them. So you can see your password. So anything you type here is not going to be shown. So this allows your user to input a password. The next input function now I'm going to be talking about is the text area input. So the difference between this input function and the text input is that this text area input gives you a wider space to write a text. So you can write something like a paragraph, an essay in a text area input. Also has similar arguments like other input functions. When you check it, you can see you have your input ID, your label, your value, your width, your height. So the difference is that in other input functions, the password and the text input will hide only width, but in this situation you have width and height. So because we are talking about the text area inputs in this situation, if you want someone to write an essay, you can adjust the height and the width to a much more larger box the person is going to write an essay. So let's see. Let's have my input ID. I can have my input ID now as area, text area. Now, then let me have my label. Your biography. So when you check the width and the height, you can see the width and the height can either be given in pixels or in percentage format. So you can see the text space. This is 100 by 100 pixels. So you can, anything you want to type, say my name. So you can see, so it can't exceed this. If you want it to be much more bigger, then you have to go back to the user interface place and set it. So you can see it has a scroll in case the texts are much more than that. So these are the three major text inputs that you are going to be using if you want your user to give an input to your server. The next set of functions we are going to be talking about are the numeric input functions. These functions allows your user to give numeric inputs into the web app, which will be used at the server side. There are actually two. We have the numeric input and we have the slider input. This is the numeric input functions. It allows your user to type in the numbers that is going to be used as the input. You are already familiar, I'm very sure you're already familiar with the input ID, the ID of the input, the label, and also the value. We have the minimum. This is going to be the minimum value that this input is going to accept, the maximum value also that the input is going to accept, and we have the step of the input. So the input can move, if you want the input to be a particular step, let's say you want it to be a step of 10, a step of 20, a step of 30, or a decimal step of 0.1, for example. So now let's say I have a numeric input age. I'm going to give it the ID age, and I'm also going to give it the label. Age. So now I'm going to give the maximum value. Let me first of all give the default value. Default value, for example, can be 25. The minimum value, we're going to give the minimum value as 1. Maximum value can be 100. And you all know that age is a step of 1. So we're going to give a step of what? 1. If we were to run this app, so you can see our default value here. You can see our label. So, and if we were to check, let's see, it can't go less than 1. This is the minimum value that this input can take. And also, let's see for the maximum, if we were to give 200. So you can see it can't go more than 100. So this is the maximum value that this input can take. So if, for example, I'm to give 200, and at the server side, it is going to use this input, then it cannot take more than 100. So this is the maximum value already given in the numeric input. The next is going to be the slider input. The slider input also has similar arguments to that of the numeric input. In fact, let's just copy this. I just want to show you how similar they are. Copy this and paste it. And let's just change this numeric to slider. So, with this, you already have your slider input. All the arguments are the same, all the arguments are similar, except that in this scenario, it is not the user that is going to input a text. The user is going to use a slider to select the number that the input is going to take. Let's run this web app and see. So you can see, unlike the numeric inputs, the slider inputs allows the user to slide between values and also by the step of, can you see the steps? It allows the user to slide by a step of 1 and cannot take a maximum value of 100, more than a value more than 100, and cannot also take a value less than 1. If I'm to change this value to 0.1, the step to 0.1, the slider is going to be moving by a step of 0.1. So you can see the slider they are all represented in decimal points, so the slider is going to be moving by a step of 0.1. So these are the two ways which you can use to give a numeric input into your web app. The next inputs are the date inputs. This allows your users to give a value in date format. So we have the date inputs. You can see the argument of the date inputs. So we have input ID, you have the label, we have the default value, and also have the minimum or maximum. So we are only interested in the input ID, the label, and also maybe the default value if you want to give a default value to your date input. So let's say I have a date input with an ID, DOB, date of birth, and I give a label of date of birth. So when you run this app, so you can see we have our date input. So this is the default placeholder. I've already talked about the placeholder argument. So you can select any date. So I don't think in the date input it is necessary for you to give a minimum or maximum date, except maybe you are dealing with ages. When you don't want someone's age to exceed 100, then you can give a maximum age. But for now, we can choose any date from our calendar. So this is how you can provide a date input to your web app. We also have the date range input. The date range input. This is used to select ranges between various dates. So this gives you the option to select two dates, to give 2 dates. So for example, someone was born on this date, and I can give another range to also. So this is how the date input also works. This takes data that is in, or values that are in date formats to be used on your server side. The next inputs are the choices inputs. This allows your users to choose between given choices. The first is the select input. So let's say, for example, now you want your user to choose sex. Let's give the ID as sex. So in the select input, this is the input ID, the label, and the choices. So we're going to give the input ID, the label, which is going to be displayed on the web app, and the choices which the user is going to select from. So let's give the ID as sex. Then we can now give the label as sex. They can now give the choices. The choices is going to be in a list. We are going to give the choices in a list. So let's say male and female. So when you run this, so you can see that anybody that is using this app can select, the person can select his or her sex, either as male or female. So this is one thing about the choices input. So if also you don't want to use the select input, you can use the radio buttons. So let me just copy this. And just change this to radio buttons. So you can see and run the app. So you can see the radio button format. This is another way of allowing your user to select an input. We also have the checkboxes. We have the checkboxes. So the checkboxes allow your users to check a value or an option. So one different thing about the radio buttons and the checkboxes is that in the checkbox input, you can see we have two. We have the checkbox group input and we have the checkbox input. So one thing about checkboxes is that in checkboxes, you can actually choose all the options or just choose a single option or choose maybe 2 if it's 3 options. So in this kind, if we want a format let's say similar to our radio buttons, we are going to use the checkbox group input. So you can see the checkbox group input with the same argument as we are used in the radio button and the select input. So let's reload the app and see. So you can see the checkbox. The user can select either all the options or the user can select only a single option. Now, one thing is that what if you want a single checkbox? So you can actually use this checkbox. You can use it to give a single checkbox. The one we used is checkbox group input, while we have the checkbox. So in the checkbox, we only have the label. You use the input ID, the label, and just the value. So the value can either be true or false. So when the value is false, it means the box is unchecked. When the value is true, it means the box is checked. So let's just say we have something like, so let's say I have something like Q1, let's say question 1, and I'll give a label of, okay, let me put my comma here, and I'll give a label of do you like jogging? And the default value, I'm going to give the default value as, I'm going to give the default value as false, which means when we load our app, the checkbox is going to be unchecked. When I give a default value of true, it's going to be checked. So do you like jogging? So the user can actually tick this. So that's all for the choices input and how you can use the choices input on your web app. So the last two input functions I'm going to be talking about is the file input and the action button. So the file input allows you to be able to upload a file to your web app. So when you check the file input, as you can see, it has an input ID also. To reference it at the server side, it has also a label. So these are the two functions these are the two arguments we'll just be needing. So let's give it, for example, we want to give it a input ID of IMG, which is image. You can now say here, passport. I'll give this as passport. So let's run the web app. So you can see this, you can upload a file. So you can click on this and go to your file explorer and upload any file from your PC. So the next function we are going to be talking about is the action button function, allowing your user to perform the action. It also takes an ID, let's say submit, and you can now say the label submit. So let's say, for example, after creating a form, you want the user to submit, you can use the action button. How the action button works, it works at the server side. So all what the action button is going to be doing is going to be working at the server side. So it's going to be taking the inputs from the user interface and also be working at the server side. In this exercise, I want you to design a form which a user can fill, something similar to this. And at the end of filling the form, the user can hit the submit button and submit their inputs. So the user is going to give in their name as a text and give in their surname as a text, and also input their values or use the arrow keys to select their values, and also use the date, the calendar, to select their date of birth. The user also have the opportunity to select their sets with radio buttons, and also input their hobbies in a text box, and also there are questions which the user can tick to answer. And the user will also be able to upload their image on the web app. At the end of this, the user should be able to hit the submit button and submit their inputs. So if you find creating any of these inputs difficult, you could refer to any lecture and check it for reference. I'm going to give the solution in the next lecture.